Okay, we're using JOSM for the GNS name import projects, and we went through there's a set of configuration videos that show you all the actual configuration of JOSM you need to do. And this video is going to focus on setting up JOSM to actually do the import process. So we're not going to do any importing, and we're not going to do any configuration. We're just going to load up a task. We're going to load up the GNS import data file, and then I'm going to set up JOSM the way that I use it before I actually get started on merging items. So we're working on this Sierra Leone GNS import, and I already have JOSM up and running. So I'm going to go ahead and find a task to work on here, and I guess we'll just pick one of these tasks at random, since most of the high priority stuff has already been done. And I'm going to say start mapping. This is sort of important, the order that you do this, at least it is for JOSM on my machine. If I don't do it in this exact order, then I end up with not the right layers. So the first step for me is always to say edit with JOSM. And so this will load up the task in JOSM. This is just like you've probably done before. And this puts my data layer here at the top in JOSM. And then I switch back to the task and I click on import the GNS file directly in JOSM. And so if I click on that, you always have to confirm that it's WGS84 geographic. So far every single one has been, so I just say OK, and it downloads the data and it overlays it on the OpenStreetMap data layer. And this is the way that I work. I always have the GNS data as the top layer and the OpenStreetMap data layer as the second layer. I generally also come right up here and I choose Save As. This gets imported as a comma-separated value file, which JOSM can't save to. So if you say Save As, it'll save it as its own JOSM server file. And I usually name it something like T for task, and this is task 619, and then I did that wrong. P for project, and this is project 619, and then T for task, and this is task 133, and it'll automatically put the extension on it for me. And this way I can merge half of these and come back to the same task and merge the other half and not have to worry about where it was. It kind of assumes nobody else works on it in the meantime, but the way it's been going is one person has generally been doing a task, and if you've got to come back in 3 or 4 sessions and finish it, generally somebody else is not working on that task. There's plenty of other squares for people to work on, so it hasn't really been a problem. So I usually save that. I already have, we loaded in the measuring plugin in the configuration, and so I have the measuring panel open. I have the command, and I shrink it down. I have the command stack panel open. Occasionally when you're working on this, you're going to want to look back and see what you've done or haven't done, so I give that a little bit of space. The selection panel, I move this down a lot. It doesn't need a ton of space because you're not going to be selecting a whole lot of things at once. If you have 1 or 2 villages selected, you don't need a whole lot of space to display it. But you are going to have a lot of layers, and you are going to have a lot of tags on the things that you're working with. So I split the majority of my space between tags and layers. And so all I have now is the OpenStreetMap data, and I have the GNS import data laid over top of that. What I need now is I need imagery, so that I can actually see what's on the ground, hopefully. And then I need maps to help me decide where all these things get placed, because you can see they sort of just come in a grid. And all of these are If they're on this grid, then all of these are basically labeled as skip. Flag skip equals yes. And they just kind of come in on this grid, which means that they're not very exactly placed. So, I load my imagery in a very specific way. The most helpful and detailed imagery that we have access to usually is the Bing satellite imagery, so I make that the first layer, working from the bottom to the top. Now this doesn't look especially good. Yeah, okay, great. Alright, well we're not going to have great imagery for this, it looks like. It looks like we only have high-res imagery for about half of this task square, or maybe 3/4 of the task square, but we'll come back and worry about that later. Bing Sat, I want to be on the bottom. The next one is Mapbox Satellite, which often might very well cover where Bing Satellite doesn't. It doesn't really cover it in this instance, so it's not going to matter very much. Then the next thing I want is the Landsat Normal, because this is the next most useful imagery. If you don't have Bing Satellite high-res, you don't have Mapbox high-res, the next most useful imagery to you is going to be Landsat 8 normal color. And the next most useful imagery after that is going to be the Landsat 8 false color. Because you're going to want to check and make sure that there's not residential areas that aren't marked. A lot of these are already marked, and that's great. Somebody's already gone through and marked your residential areas. So when you start looking at the map, a lot of times you're going to see the residential areas behind it, and you're going to be able to line them up or move these where they go pretty quickly. But if there's nothing, anytime you start to work on one, you want to sort of scan the area to make sure there's not unmarked residential areas, and we'll get to that shortly. So Bing, Mapbox, Landsat 8 normal, Landsat 8 false, and now we get to maps. And the most useful map that you'll have access to is the U.S. Army JOG map, so I load that layer next. This one is very precise. You can see usually where it has a circle for a town or a village, that's where there's a town or a village. Now, nobody's marked anything here because you don't see anything in the background, but a lot of times right where the JOG map says it is, something is there, and that's because the JOG map is pretty accurate. The next map that we load is the AMS 1955 map. The AMS 1955 map usually needs to have the background adjusted, so you might very well need to do the imagery offset. This one is very typically off, and it varies across the map, so you'll be making the adjustments for that one. The JOG map, you don't usually have to adjust it very often. It usually comes in pretty good, but the offset for the AMS maps always need adjustment. So the advantage to this AMS map is it has a lot more names of villages on it. If you look at the JOG map, there's a lot fewer village names on it. It's kind of hard to tell here since I left my names here at 15 point, but there's a lot fewer village names. There's a lot more village names on the AMS map, but the AMS map is a lot less accurate, although some of these are coming in pretty well. This is very interesting. These are lining up pretty good right off the bat. Normally that doesn't happen. Must be the area I'm in. That's great. And then the very last set of maps is the AMS 1942 maps. This map is nice, but it has the fewest villages of any listed on it. So this one will also need to have its offset adjusted, but it's primarily as just a triple check on the other two maps because it has so few village names on it. It's not going to be terribly useful. If it's on the 1942 map, then it's on either the AMS 1955 map or it's on the Army JOG map already. And this is really just a triple check, but I load it up anyway. And so when I get ready to do this, I basically turn off everything except for Bing. And so this is the order I like to have these in. And so essentially what I do is, the first thing I do is I zoom in and I start looking to see if there's any unmarked residential areas. So this is on the grid, which means it's an approximate placement. Flag skip equals yes, which means it can be anywhere in about a 2-kilometer square area. And yeah, it's closest to this one, and this one's not out of the question. We'll just have to look at a map. But then I go through and I start, first I want to look and see if there's any unmapped residential areas. And I don't see any, but I'm going to check the Landsat, since that would help me spot unmapped residential areas. And the Landsat imagery is a little bit newer. Okay, so I'm going to assume that there's no real unmapped residential areas here. That's probably a school. This item, probably not. I can't do much about it. That one doesn't look like it. That one doesn't look like an unmapped residential area. I can check it with the false color, and I can definitely see that it's, it's not the classic pink. It's a little bit different shade. It's probably not a residential area. And then the very first map I want to check is the JOG map, and you really hope that what you're trying to place, the node you're trying to place, is on the JOG map. And this one is. That's great. This one's on the JOG map. You can double check it with the AMS map. Granted, I haven't done the imagery adjustment on the AMS map, but for a quick check, it works out pretty well. This does not happen very often in some parts of Sierra Leone where the AMS map matches up so well. But double check the spelling. Mabama, and this is Mabama. That works out. The AMS map double checks it. Also Mabama, so that looks pretty good. We can stick this one here. I'm not going to merge it right now because we'll get to that later. But let's take a look at this village here. And so the first thing I'm going to do is look for unmapped residential areas. I don't really see any. It's great. Double check with the Landsat imagery, which is a little bit newer. You can see Landsat's pretty good as far as image alignment goes. False color, nope, that's great. So I don't see any unmapped residential areas here. So Army JOG map. Okay, Army JOG map, not on here. This is not, well, actually I take that back. Oh no. Well, yeah, this one's not on here. There's one with a similar name, but it's definitely not the same, especially since there's one that actually goes there. So now you're going to check the AMS map. And the AMS map doesn't have this one on there either. So we're going to have to, this one you're just going to mark as, I'll just show you, this one you're just going to mark as location approximate and let it be that. And that one's done, since you can't really do very much with it since it's not on any of these maps. But what I wanted you to get the idea is that we step up here. We go up in specificity for helping us. So the first thing we did was check the JOG. First thing we did was check Bing, see if there's unmapped residential areas. Quick check with Landsat to see if there's some we're not missing, since that's a little bit more recent. And then we went to Army JOG, because if it's on there, it's usually placed pretty well. And it wasn't, so then we checked the AMS map. It wasn't on there in this case, so all we could really do was stick it on there and mark it location approximate. But I wanted you to get the sense of why these things are in the order that they're in. And it's because we start with, we are going up in helpfulness, and then, we could check there, but it's never going to be on there. So that's it. This is how I set up my environment before I get to work, really get down to brass tacks and start merging these things in.